In the summer of 1817, London glittered with chandeliers and concealed its cruelty beneath silk and courtesy, and it was into this bright, pitiless theater that Briseis stepped with measured grace. She was 23, strikingly beautiful, yet never careless with it, her loveliness sharpened by intelligence and restraint. As companion to her widowed aunt, she entered the season without fortune enough to shield her and without parents to defend her, and society sensed this vulnerability at once, like blood in still water. At her first assembly, whispers followed her progress across the marble floor, not admiring, but assessing, weighing her value as one might a painting without a signature. She stood alone longer than was kind, her gloved hands folded, her spine unyielding, while couples formed and dissolved around her. When at last she heard her name, it was not spoken with invitation, but with faint amusement, a lady remarking that beauty without title was a dangerous indulgence. Briseis received the slight without flinching, though the humiliation burned keenly beneath her calm expression. She had learned early that dignity, once surrendered, was never returned whole. It was then she first observed the Duke of Ravenshollow, positioned apart from the dancers, a figure of composed authority amid the glittering excess. At 26, he was already spoken of with a mixture of awe and unease, a man shaped by inheritance rather than affection. His dark hair and severe bearing marked him as handsome, yet his eyes revealed little warmth, as though emotion were an extravagance he could not afford. Rumor insisted he was burdened by debt and bound by an unrelenting sense of duty, and that whatever softness he possessed had long since been disciplined out of him. Their introduction came not by design, but by necessity. Briseis, drawn into a conversation on land improvement and rural tenancy, spoke with quiet assurance, citing her late father's experience managing a modest estate. The Duke, overhearing, turned his attention upon her with visible displeasure. When she finished, he addressed her directly, his tone clipped and precise, dismissing her observations as impractical idealism. Before she could reply, he concluded the exchange with words that would soon echo beyond the room. "You are not my concern, Miss Briseis." The remark, though spoken softly, struck with unmistakable force. A hush followed, subtle yet unmistakable. Briseis met his gaze without apology, offering neither retreat nor appeal, only a measured inclination of her head. In that moment, something unspoken passed between them, not affection, but recognition of equal will. Yet society observed only the surface, and by the following morning, the incident had been embroidered into gossip, her name paired with his in tones that suggested presumption on her part and irritation on his. Despite this, circumstances conspired to bind them. A letter summoned Briseis to attend her aunt at a consultation concerning property near Ravenshollow lands, territory once managed by her father and now contested. The Duke would preside over the negotiations. As she read the summons, the memory of his dismissive gaze returned with unwelcome clarity. Still, she resolved to attend, knowing that avoidance would only confirm the judgments already forming around her. On the appointed day, she arrived at the townhouse appointed for the meeting, sunlight pooling upon the steps, the air heavy with summer's promise. Inside, the Duke awaited, composed as ever, yet when his eyes met hers, there was a fleeting hesitation, swiftly masked. Briseis took her seat opposite him, her posture calm, her expression unreadable, aware that whatever passed between them next would extend far beyond contracts and boundaries. As the meeting commenced, London's distant murmur seemed to press closer, as though the city itself leaned in to witness the collision of pride and circumstance. Briseis understood then that her place in this world would not be secured by compliance, nor threatened by his indifference alone. The conflict before her was no longer merely social, but deeply personal, and though she could not yet name the cost, she sensed that this summer would demand far more than she had ever intended to give. Beneath the formal exchange of pleasantries and papers, a quieter struggle unfolded, one of restraint against curiosity. The Duke listened more closely than he wished, noting the precision of her arguments, the care with which she chose each word, and the absence of fear in her manner. Briseis, for her part, felt the weight of his attention like a held breath, unsettling yet clarifying, as though the world had narrowed to the space between them. Neither conceded ground, yet neither withdrew, and in that mutual resistance lay the first hint of a connection neither would willingly acknowledge. Outside, carriages rolled onward, unaware that two resolute lives had begun, irrevocably, to turn toward collision that summer evening. In the days that followed the first negotiation, Briseis found herself drawn repeatedly into the Duke's orbit, not by inclination, but by necessity. Papers required clarification, boundaries demanded inspection, and each matter seemed to summon her presence with quiet insistence. The Duke remained outwardly unchanged, his manner precise, his speech economical, yet she sensed an undercurrent of scrutiny beneath his reserve. He listened when she spoke, though he rarely acknowledged it, and this silent attention unsettled her more than outright dismissal ever had. Their meetings shifted from formal rooms to open air, where summer pressed warmly upon the land. They walked the edge of fields her father had once tended, the grass high and sunlit, larks rising at their approach. Briseis spoke of tenants she remembered from childhood, of soil and seasons, of stewardship earned through care rather than command. The Duke countered with figures and obligations, his voice steady, but his pace slowed as he listened. He did not agree with her, yet he no longer interrupted, and that restraint marked a subtle change neither named. London, however, was less patient. Whispers followed her through drawing rooms and along promenades, speculation ripening with every sighting of her near Ravenshollow interests. A borrowed volume from his library, returned with careful notes in the margin, became the subject of exaggerated rumor. When she was seen leaving a carriage associated with his estate, tongues wagged with renewed enthusiasm. Briseis felt the weight of judgment keenly, yet she refused to retreat, knowing that absence would only invite harsher invention. The Duke, for his part, became aware of the shifting tide with reluctant clarity. He observed the glances cast her way, the sudden silences upon her entrance, and felt an unfamiliar unease settle upon him. To protect one's reputation was an unspoken rule of his world, yet he had never before considered how easily it could be eroded by implication alone. When he offered her the use of shaded path through his gardens to avoid the crowded road, the gesture was practical, he told himself, nothing more. It was along that path, as dusk softened the air, that tension finally found voice. Briseis confronted him with the cost of association, her tone composed but edged with fatigue. He replied with restraint, insisting that he owed her nothing beyond courtesy. The words rang hollow even as he spoke them, for he had begun to anticipate her presence, to note the lift of her brow when she challenged him, the quiet conviction with which she held her ground. When she accused him of hiding behind, rank to avoid responsibility, something within him gave way. The kiss was neither planned nor gentle. It was born of frustration and startled recognition, a brief collision beneath the fading light. For an instant, the world narrowed to breath and heat and the sharp awareness of impropriety. Then reality returned with alarming speed. Briseis stepped back, color rising in her cheeks, her composure shaken but intact. She said nothing, nor did he attempt explanation. Footsteps sounded nearby, and they parted as though by mutual command. That night, London learned its lesson swiftly. By morning, suggestion had hardened into certainty. Invitations cooled, and Briseis felt doors close with polite finality. She bore it outwardly with calm, though privately she reckoned with the cost of a single moment's weakness. The Duke, standing at his window, watched the city stir and understood, too late, that restraint alone would not protect either of them now. Briseis endured the following weeks with a composure that surprised even herself, though each day required deliberate resolve. Her aunt observed the subtle changes in society's behavior, the softened excuses, the invitations misplaced, and spoke of departure with careful concern. Briseis did not protest, Yet the notion of retreat felt like surrender, and she resolved to face whatever judgment remained before yielding to it. She had not sought scandal, yet she would not pretend innocence where courage had briefly failed. The Duke, meanwhile, withdrew into solitude with an intensity that bordered on punishment. He attended fewer engagements, answered correspondence with mechanical efficiency, and found no satisfaction in routine. The memory of the garden lingered with unwelcome clarity, not merely the impropriety, but the unmistakable truth it revealed. He had acted without calculation, without armor, and the realization disturbed him more than any rumor. For the first time, duty felt less like protection and more like refuge from feeling. Their paths crossed again by necessity rather than chance. Briseis was summoned to review final documents before her anticipated departure, and the Duke insisted upon her presence despite his advisor's objections. When she entered his study that evening, rain streaked the windows and firelight cast shifting shadows across the room. He rose at her approach, his customary reserve strained by something quieter and more vulnerable beneath it. She noted the change at once and steadied herself. He began formally, speaking of papers and resolutions, yet the words faltered. Silence filled the space between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. At last, he set the documents aside and confessed what he had never before articulated. He spoke of a childhood governed by expectation, of affection withheld as indulgence, of learning early that emotion complicated authority. Love, he admitted, had always seemed a liability he could not afford. His voice remained controlled, yet each sentence stripped away a layer of practiced detachment. Briseis listened without interruption, though her heart quickened with each revelation. When he finished, she did not offer comfort but clarity. She told him that silence had cost her more than scandal, that restraint without responsibility was merely avoidance. She would not be hidden nor protected by secrecy. If he wished to remain untouched by consequence, he must release her entirely. The choice, she said quietly, was his alone. The weight of her words settled heavily. The Duke realized then that power lay not in distance, but in decision. He could retreat, preserving his reputation at her expense, or he could speak, accepting the cost of honesty. For a moment, fear tightened its grip, old and familiar. Then he met her gaze and felt something steadier take its place. He promised nothing yet, but he did not dismiss her. Instead, he acknowledged her dignity with a respect that had been absent before. He found himself recalling her earliest defiance, the stillness with which she endured judgment, and the precision of her thought when others dismissed her presence. These recollections unsettled him because they carried admiration unguarded by rank. He understood then that indifference had been his shield, and that removing it exposed him to loss. Yet the notion of her departure, of her name forever altered by his inaction, stirred something close to resolve. He had been trained to govern land and lineage, not consequence of the heart, yet both now demanded equal courage. When she left, the rain had eased, leaving the city hushed and expectant. The Duke remained by the fire, aware that whatever course he chose would alter him irrevocably. Briseis stepped into the night with renewed resolve, uncertain of his answer, but certain of her own worth. Neither knew what the morrow would demand, only that retreat was no longer possible, and that the quiet battle between fear and devotion had at last been joined in earnest, pressing toward a reckoning neither could now avoid. Outside, London slept uneasily, unaware of the choice forming in silence. By morning, rumor and expectation would return, but something irreversible had shifted, and neither silence nor distance would restore what had been awakened between them. The season pressed onward, carrying them both toward an inevitable moment of reckoning and truth. Neither would emerge unchanged thereafter. Morning arrived with deliberate calm, as though London itself paused to witness what would follow. Briseis prepared to depart with her aunt, her belongings packed with careful efficiency, her expression serene despite the uncertainty pressing upon her thoughts. She had chosen dignity over pleading, and whatever the outcome, she would leave without regret. Yet as the carriage waited, A message arrived requesting her presence at a final gathering, modest in scale, yet unmistakably public. The invitation bore the Duke's seal. The assembly took place in a garden newly opened for the season, where roses climbed pale trellises and the air carried the warmth of late summer. Society gathered with calculated curiosity, eager for resolution, yet prepared for disappointment. Briseis entered composed, her bearing unchanged by scrutiny, though every glance felt sharpened by expectation. She did not seek the Duke at once, but sensed him before she saw him, standing apart as he had at their first meeting, his posture rigid, his expression resolute. When he approached, conversation softened around them, attention drawn by instinct rather than invitation. He addressed her formally at first, acknowledging her presence with courtesy that carried unfamiliar warmth. Then, with deliberate clarity, he spoke not only to her, but to those within hearing. He affirmed her integrity, her intelligence, and the injustice of the rumors that had pursued her. Each word was measured, yet unmistakable in intent. Murmurs followed, some disapproving, others startled by the breach of custom. Briseis listened without interruption, her composure unwavering though her heart quickened. When he turned fully toward her, the space between them seemed charged with meaning. He spoke then not as a duke defending propriety, but as a man claiming choice. He admitted his failure to act sooner, his reliance on distance as a shield, and his recognition that silence had become a form of cruelty. He declared that he would no longer permit his rank to excuse his restraint. The proposal was not dramatic in gesture, yet it carried undeniable force. He asked not for forgiveness, but for partnership, acknowledging her as his equal in will and mind. He told her that he once believed concern to be weakness, and that he had been wrong. His voice, steady yet softened, carried across the gathered company, leaving no doubt of his intent. The world, for a moment, seemed to hold its breath. Briseis replied with measured calm, though emotion threaded her words. She accepted not from triumph, but from conviction, affirming that choice, freely given, was the only foundation she would stand upon. She spoke of dignity preserved through truth and of affection earned through courage. Her assent, offered without flourish, carried a quiet authority that silenced lingering doubt. The Duke bowed his head briefly, a gesture of respect more than relief. The days that followed unfolded with purposeful simplicity. Preparations were made without excess, and speculation gradually yielded to acceptance. Society adjusted, as it always did, reweaving the narrative to accommodate what could no longer be ignored. The marriage took place beneath open sky, the ceremony marked by warmth rather than spectacle. Sunlight filtered through leaves, and the air carried the promise of continuity rather than conquest. As Briseis stood beside him, she felt not triumph, but steadiness, the assurance of having been seen and chosen without reservation. The Duke, in turn, discovered a quiet freedom in relinquishing detachment, in allowing devotion to exist without disguise. Their union did not erase the world's cruelties, but it redefined their place within it, shaping a partnership founded on mutual regard. When the gathering dispersed and the season moved onward, London resumed its rhythms, yet something subtle had shifted. A story once whispered had been spoken aloud, its ending claimed rather than endured. Briseis and the Duke of Ravenshollow departed together, not toward certainty, but toward a future shaped by deliberate choice. The summer of 1817 lingered in memory, not for its splendor, but for the quiet defiance of two lives that refused to remain unchanged.